everybody. Like she said, I'm Ian. This is Will. We are going to dive deeper in for sure. Put any questions that you have along the way into the chat or the Q&A section.
Definitely.
And that's what I'm most excited to
Yeah,
get
that'll be
into.
fun.
But yeah, where should we start, Will?
Yeah, so as Melanie said, we're going beyond the basics today. We talked about the basics when it comes to investing in real estate through a self-directed IRA. On that first webinar, we have a webinar replays page. Feel free to look for it there. We'll just start with what a self-directed IRA is, excuse me, just really quickly, so we're all on the same page here. So it's an IRA. At the end of the day, all the same IRS rules and regulations apply. It just allows you to invest in alternative investments, which includes real estate. And most of our clients are invested in real estate. If you had to guess, Ian, what proportion of our clients are invested in real estate?
So my guess is probably about 60%, just based on conversations that that we've had. Sorry. And that would be beyond just necessarily, physically owning real estate to also invest in real estate funds and various assets. But
Exactly.
yeah, about
Syndication deals, very, very popular on our platform. So we'll start with the kinds of real estate that are basically possible under a self-directed IRA. So the answer there is you could really invest in any type of real estate. Rental properties are definitely the most popular. It could be, single family, commercial real estate, condos, and so forth. Really, the only restrictions are who you can transact with. We'll go into that a little bit more in a bit. But yeah, as I said, rental properties are very popular. I'm sure you find the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so cash flowing properties, excellent choice for an IRA, especially if you're familiar with real estate. It's kind of a natural choice for an individual like that. When it comes to income and expenses related to the property, keep in mind everything needs to be done through the IRA. So when you are titling a property, the IRA will be listed on the purchase contract, at least with Madison, it would be listed as Madison Trust Company, custodian FBO, so for benefit of, and then your name and your Madison account number. So you'll have the titling once you open your account. So we have that account number. But we'll hold your hand through this process. We'll make sure everything is titled correctly when the time does come. And there are other options where the titling might not be exactly that. It might not be in the name of your Madison IRA. Again, something we'll go over later on in this webinar. But when it comes to expenses, everything needs to come out of the IRA. So an expense comes up like property taxes, let Madison Trust know. You fill out a form with us. It's our expense payment request form. And you're basically just telling us where to send these funds, making sure the account keeps its tax advantage status, make sure no prohibited transactions are taking place. When it comes to income, same idea. I don't know if you want to dive in there on how income should be
Yeah, absolutely.
deposited.
So most typically the rent checks or whatever income you're generating is going to be literally made payable to that long blur Madison
Right.
Trust Company custodian FBO, your account name and your account number. Sometimes what we've seen, and we'll get into checkbook control later, but aside from that, sometimes you'll have a property management company as the intermediary.
Right.
And so the the rent check is really going to the property management company. They're covering some of those expenses on their side. And so a net income check is then coming again in the name of that Madison Trust Company titling, but it's coming from the property management company as opposed to the individual. And one trip up that I see so often, and early on in this webinar is the best time to talk about it, make sure everybody hears it, is earnest money deposit.
Yeah.
That I mean, so often people come to us, rightfully so. People come to us, they learn about the self-directed IRA option. They say, hey, I've got this property. I've already, put it under contract. I just learned about the self-directed IRA. Now I need to do all this and I need to do it quickly. So back up. First, we need to have the self-directed IRA established and funded with something, a few $1,000s at the very least to cover that earnest money deposit. It cannot come from personal funds. And that is, I would say, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that's the biggest pitfall that people experience in this
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. even if time doesn't allow for you to fund an IRA, even with a minimal balance for that earnest money deposit, maybe have someone who's not disqualified cover the earnest money. Your IRA can reimburse them at a later date. We can go over who those individuals are later on in the webinar. But let's say you have a friend who's willing to cover that earnest money. Perfect. They cover the earnest money. After closing, you can reimburse them and it'll be a clean transaction. No prohibited transaction would have been taking place in that scenario. And just again, at the end of the day, income is accepted by the IRA, expenses are paid by the IRA. So no commingling of personal and IRA funds there. So I think we covered that topic pretty well. The next on our list, we're going to talk about financing within the IRA. So when it comes to securing a loan, the IRA is going to need to get a non-recourse loan. So basically, that means that the only recourse in the event of default would be the property, and that's it. They're just taking back the collateral. So they can't go after the account holder of the IRA itself. And if you have one of these checkbook plans, which we'll go over later, they can't go after your entity, either an LLC or a trust. So literally, they can just take back that property to satisfy the debt. At the same time, you can't use your personal credit score to secure this loan, and you can't personally guarantee the loan because it's the IRA that's taking the loan. So for those reasons, I got to be frank, the terms are not as favorable as a conventional mortgage. It's a little riskier for the bank, for sure. And then there are tax implications too, which we'll dive into here. It's called, basically the tax you'd be paying is unrelated business income tax, and that is derived from any profits that were generated from that debt financing. We'll dive into that in a bit, but I do want to mention that we do have a preferred lender for non-recourse loans. Call Ian or I after this call. We can have a conversation about this. Happy to connect you with them. So you're not alone here. We can help every step of the way, including the non-recourse financing.
Right, and just to add to that, also, no, the question that I'm sure somebody in the audience listening is thinking, the answer is no. You cannot just go to your bank or your mortgage broker. Most times, most institutions, financial institutions in general, do not offer non-recourse loans, again, because it's a little bit riskier from the bank's perspective. So just for compliance purposes, they like to always have that personal guarantee clause included. And so that would nullify those options available to you. That's why we've gone out of our way to find a banking partner to help our clients. So that's just a piece to consider there, is it's not a very common product, but there are banks and financial institutions out there that can provide that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had mentioned this UBIT tax from the profits generated from a debt financing. Ian and I were just talking about this actually. Do you want to go over what UDFI is? I mean, I kind of already went over it, but in more detail, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Unrelated debt financing income.
Yes.
UDFI, it applies to the financed portion of your investment. So take a simple scenario. You buy $100,000 property, you borrow 50%, and so $50,000, and you are making now $1,000 a month on that property. So outside of the IRA, you're looking at the entire $1,000 as potentially taxed. In this case, it's only the financed portion. So 50% is financed, 50% of the net income is taxable. So that's only $500 of the $1,000. And then and it's based on a tax bracketed system that you can check out on our website. You can contact us. We can talk you through the bracketed system a little bit more, but that's the general idea of the UDFI tax, is it's based on the finance portion. The thought process behind that is that the IRS says that you've contributed to the IRA, rightfully so. That's your tax advantaged dollars, but you're borrowing additional funds. That's not your IRA's money. And so anything you earn off of the borrowed amount is money that the IRS, wants a piece of it, just like they would outside of an IRA. So, and there's ways to offset that through depreciation, operating expenses, things like that. But know that it is there, and you're going to want to have an accountant behind you to to calculate that and make sure that it makes sense for you as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that UBIT could be minimal or even non-existent. You don't even have to report UBIT if it's below $1,000. So, it's typically not a big deal. I don't want to minimize it too much, but typically, to be frank, it really isn't a big deal. And I guess you could view it as a cost of doing business. If getting a non-recourse loan allows you to diversify your retirement portfolio and, this is something you really want to do or you're familiar with, then why not? Definitely possible. Either way.
Right. At the end of the day, it literally is free money to your IRA that your IRA otherwise would not have had access to.
Exactly. So an excellent tool if you're into investing in real estate here. I think we covered pretty much everything. I'm sure we'll have questions about it at the end of the webinar, but I guess we'll dive into some prohibited transactions. So these really come into play with real estate. So all of the classic examples when it comes to prohibited transactions deal with real estate. And by the way, we did do a webinar exclusively on prohibited transactions. So that I'm assuming will go into more depth than we will here. But anyway, that's on our webinar replays page. But anyway, when it comes to prohibited transactions, these are transactions with certain individuals. So it's not a transaction into a particular investment. There's some investment types that are off limits. Again, we talk about that in other webinars. But when it comes to the disqualified individuals to your IRA, it would be yourself as the IRA owner, your spouse, ancestors. So that would be parents, grandparents, etc., and lineal descendants. So children, grandchildren, and their spouses. So these would be the disqualified individuals. So this means your IRA can't transact with these individuals, and these individuals cannot benefit from your IRA or vice versa. So if you own a property personally, that means your IRA can't purchase that property from yourself. That's a blatant, easy prohibited transaction. Same if you just literally assign the property to your IRA, that there's no exchange of money, still a prohibited transaction because you're dealing with yourself there. Anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, I think so. Just to be clear on that, on the flip side, individuals that may feel like they might be disqualified but aren't, for whatever reason, the world may never know. The IRS says that siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, relationships that are horizontal in nature are all fair game. So you could buy a property from, say, your brother,
Right.
or invest with your brother and, have dealings in that regard. But no, yeah, you said it best on who's disqualified.
Exactly. And just to add another example, just to make this very clear, let's say you have a niece or nephew in college and you decide you want to use your IRA to buy, a unit in a student housing complex. You can rent that property out to your niece and nephew. That's no problem. If it was your son or daughter, then it's a no-go. That's not going to be possible. So it just goes to show you can still transact with family members. I don't really understand why, frankly, but let's go with it. It would just be children, for example, at least in that example, that would not be allowed to stay in that IRA owned property. So I hope we're making sense there. Again, if you have any questions, just let us know at the end of the webinar.
And beyond just the transactions themselves, to go in a little bit more on the benefit side and some other factors, what I normally tell people is, so you can't live in the property,
Right.
You can't vacation at the property, you cannot do work on the property yourself. All of that, you and those same disqualified parties cannot have any involvement with any of those things: owning, living, benefiting from, or providing what's considered a non-cash contribution, which is like doing work on the property yourself. Those are all off limits. And the same applies for any entities that are majority owned
Right.
by any of those
Right.
individuals as well. So if you have an LLC or a construction company or something that you own, that construction company isn't going to be able to do work on the property either. Maybe you hire out an independent contractor, so one of your employees, but do it separately. That's fine. They're not disqualified, but the company itself is off limits.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, what Ian was basically touched on was a self-dealing prohibited transaction. So yeah, don't stay at the property, even if you're not paying, let's say, rent to your IRA, it's still, or even if you don't, it's still going to be a prohibited transaction. Even staying there overnight, it's going to be off limits. That would be self-dealing there. A per se prohibited transaction, just a prohibited transaction with one of the disqualified individuals that I mentioned. And then an extension of credit prohibited transaction. Let's say you personally guarantee a loan for your IRA, blatant extension of credit prohibited transaction. So make sure you're not personally guaranteeing any financing for the IRA there. And that goes back to disqualified individuals. The reason why you can't use your personal credit score to secure the loan and why you can't personally guarantee this loan, it's because you're disqualified to your IRA. So I hope that clears things up. So that brings us to the checkbook IRA option. So I'll be frank, I got a little ahead of myself in terms of titling. I wanted to bring that up at this portion of the webinar. So what I described earlier with the titling of Madison Trust Company, FBO, your name and your Madison account number, that would be for, let's say, a standard self-directed IRA. With a checkbook IRA, our sister company, Broad Financial, sets up an entity that would be owned by the IRA. So they set up either an LLC or a trust. Let's say the client goes with an LLC. So the owner of that LLC would be the Madison Trust IRA. That's the connection there. And then the account holder would be the non-compensated manager. Again, goes back to prohibited transactions. But the client sets up a bank account with the institution of their choice. Madison funds that bank account with the client's IRA funds. From there, you would take over. You purchase the property in the name of the LLC, expenses are paid out of the LLC, and any income, like rental income, is deposited into the LLC. So if you don't mind, Ian, can you let everyone know why that's a real value add when it comes to real estate?
Yeah, there's a few layers to it, but the primary reason is the convenience and the timeliness of things. So I've heard some horror stories, not from our clients, but from people switching over from other companies where they had to pay an electric bill, and every single month the custodian is paying it late. They have to incur these late fees. The money is there in the IRA, it just needs to be paid. Literally every single month they're paying a late fee on their electric bill just because the custodian isn't paying it in time. So to use that as the example, having the LLC solves that problem. You are now the only one responsible for paying that electric bill on time. You don't have to submit any documents for review or for processing through us as the custodian. You're able to pay that bill yourself directly. And so that's beneficial because you can do it yourself. You can do it immediately. You don't have to wait for us. And also, you don't have to pay a transaction fee that's associated with that bill. So
Right.
if you just have the standard self-directed IRA, just as an example, with that electric bill, Madison Trust Company would charge you a $30 transaction fee. So that if you only have one bill a year, like if you're buying land and you just have property taxes you have to pay every year, then the standard self-directed IRA very well may be the best option for you. You don't have that concern of timeliness. You don't have the concern of really anything beyond just holding that land and paying the property taxes every year. So that may make it worthwhile. On the flip side, if you have a rental property and you've got monthly bills that need to be paid, you are working with a tenant and you don't want the tenant to pay a check directly to your Madison Trust Company titling, an LLC one makes it a little bit cleaner,
Cleaner,
more
clear.
yeah, all of that, but also provides you liability protection, just to protect yourself against a relationship with the tenant. And yeah, I mean, it makes life so much easier for you in the long run, especially with a rental property or vacation rentals or anything like that. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we do charge a fee for this. Again, you can talk to us about this if you call. We'll give our personal information at the end of the webinar. But there's got to be a break-even point where the transaction fees you pay with Madison Trust basically exceed the setup cost that we charge for the LLC. So, for example, if you're flipping a property, which is possible, by the way, with an IRA, you're going to want to do it under the LLC. You're going to have expenses coming up all the time. Personally, I haven't flipped a property, but I imagine that to be the case. And hiring contractors, handymen, et cetera, that needs to be done immediately. You can't wait 4 business days, which is our standard processing time, to pay those bills. So naturally, the LLC is the way to go. If you're buying real estate at an auction, for example, again, LLC is perfect. No need to wait for Madison Trust to write a check or send a wire. It's impossible at the time an auction in that respect, if you're doing it through Madison Trust directly, you would need that checkbook control through one of these IRA LLCs to make that an investment like that possible.
And to even go one step further, the LLC is or the trust are the only options available to invest in foreign real estate. So if you're
Right.
looking to buy in another country, depending on the country, they may or may not accept a trust or an LLC based in the US. We can talk about that, on a one-on-one consultation, but you're not going to be able to purchase real estate in another country through a standard self-directed IRA. It's going to need to be through one of the checkbook control plans.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you need to set up an entity in that country, like the equivalent of an LLC, and let's say, what's a popular Mexico, for example, then you can still set up an IRA LLC. The owner of this, let's say, Mexican entity can be the IRA LLC. So there's a few layers there, but at the end of the day, you're still using IRA funds to make that purchase in whatever country it may be. So great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. I'll just touch on it briefly. The other added benefit of an LLC, for example, is in the event of multiple partners going into a property. So say you and your spouse each have IRA funds or retirement funds. You can each set up your own self-directed IRA, push funds into those IRAs, and then combine them into one multi-member LLC. So that one LLC is going to be the buyer of the property. Otherwise, if you don't do it that way, there are some complexities to that. Yes, some additional things to keep in mind. But if you don't do it that way, then on the deed, it's going to show, so and so with such a percent and the other person with such a percent. And then going back to income and expenses, all of that has to be proportionately split up across the different members. It can't just come to one account, be paid one place, and then split up from there. It has to, there's a bunch of checks and wires being sent. It can get messy. It can be doable. Again, maybe with land, it works out because there's not a lot of variables. There's not a lot of moving parts, but in general, we find that the LLC multi-member is going to be the way to go if there's multiple people trying to bring IRA funds to buy a property, or even if you're trying to use personal funds and IRA funds to invest in a property. And I guess to talk about that kind of situation where you're investing alongside your IRA, can you explain why that would not be prohibited?
Oh, yeah, sure. So that is not a commingling of funds, which I sort of mentioned earlier. That would be a co-investment. Two IRAs co-investing into the same LLC, for example, or into the same property. So that's fine. But if you're co-investing with a disqualified individual, say your spouse, once those ownership percentages are established by the initial investments or initial, let's say, contributions into the LLC, for example, those ownership percentages cannot change. So a transfer of ownership units between these two members would be a prohibited transaction. So the only way for the ownership percentage to change is if that happens, transfer of ownership units. So I hope I'm making sense there. But again, just very important. Once these ownership percentages are established, they can't change. Real quick example. Let's say an unexpected expense comes up and the LLC that you've set up needs $5,000. And let's say it's 50-50. So one spouse, their IRA owns 50%. The other spouse, they own 50% as well. It doesn't need to be 50-50, by the way. It can really be anything, but it just makes the example easy. So anyway, the LLC needs $5,000. That means, given these ownership percentages, one spouse's IRA rather, is sending $2,500. Same with the other spouse's IRA. They're also sending $2,500. And this is to make sure that the ownership percentages do not change. So it's important to make sure that both individuals in this scenario are able to send more funds to the LLC at the same time when something like that happens. If someone can't make a contribution, for example, maybe they're retired, that might cause issues. Or if someone doesn't have any other retirement funds in another IRA or an old 401k, again, another area where that might cause issues. So frankly, a lot of factors to consider when you want to co-invest with a disqualified individual, but at the end of the day, still could be worth it. It might make an investment possible that wouldn't have been otherwise. So, and it's very popular. We see it all the time.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we covered a lot there on checkbook IRAs. Let's say you don't set up a checkbook IRA. Let's say you're just purchasing raw land. Madison Trust needs to review the documents related to the purchase. So we would want to take a look at the purchase contract, settlement statement, draft of the deed. If you're getting a title policy, we'll want to see that as well. You're sending all of those to us. We're not reviewing the investment to say, oh, this is a good idea, or oh, this is a bad idea. That's not our role here. We're completely passive. We're just making sure the investment's feasible. Real estate almost always is. And we're also making sure there's no prohibited transactions, making sure you're not transacting with yourself or certain family members. So if everything looks good, the client just fills out a form. It's our investment authorization form, basically just telling us where to send these funds to make the investment. And that will seal the deal. That completes the investment process there. And then going forward, as you want to go over paying expenses again, which is a standard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a matter of through your online account, you'll submit the bill, you'll complete the online expense payment request form, again, telling us who we're paying, how much we're paying, and where to send the payment, whether check or wire or otherwise, and we'll process that for you.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, 4 business days. If that's that works for you. We do know, we understand that that's not always going to cut it. And that's where the checkbook IRA comes in. So we've covered a lot here.
And our website has so much information about all of this that you can check out, read articles, watch videos, all of that. So check that out as well. But otherwise, this was fun.
That was great. Yeah.